Whose praise do you live for? And I think it really depends on who you are and your life stage and how old you are to really answer that question. Perhaps for some of us, it's we live for the praise of our family or for our friends or for our work colleagues or even for management, those above us. Maybe if we're a little bit younger, we're searching for the praise of those on social media who's following us, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or whatever else. We are seeking the praise of others. And as we think about that, you think about who am I seeking praise from? It doesn't last, does it? It never fully satisfies. And so what do? We go, well, I need more praise. I want to find it from other sources and other people. And so we keep searching and searching and searching. And let's be honest, the longer we've been doing it, the more exhausted we get. And we either keep searching until we can't find praise from one group or one particular person, so we seek it out from another, or we just give up. And yet, as we hear Jesus' words today, he gives us a very different perspective. A perspective of how you can receive praise and honor and glory that lasts, that satisfies. And so that's what I want us to be looking at today as we look at Jesus' words. And two things we're going to see coming out of Jesus' words today. And the first one is this, that Jesus says to us, you can be honored by God. See, in verse 20, as our passage starts, we're told that some Greeks come to speak to Jesus. In fact, they say they want to see Jesus. Now, the word Greeks here is not talking about just people from Greece. The word is used in the context of speaking about people who speak Greek in the towns around. In other words, they're non-Jewish people. They're Gentiles. And they come wanting to see Jesus. Now, see, it's not just as in observe from afar or even close. The word see there is talking about we want to interview Jesus. We want to know him. We want to get to know him. We want to get a close encounter with Jesus. And so they go to Philip, and Philip talks to Andrew, and together they come to Jesus. And here's the really interesting thing. Did you notice? Jesus doesn't answer their request. But he does say that they've triggered a change in the times. Have a look with me in verse 23. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Now in John's Gospel, when Jesus uses the word hour, he's not talking about 60 minutes in a time frame. He's talking about an actual time period. And if you've been with us as we've been working through John, we've seen Jesus has said a number of times, the hour has not yet come. The hour is not yet here. The hour is coming, but it's not yet. And then, when Gentiles want to see Jesus, Jesus says, the hour has come. Now, if you were here with us last week, we saw it back at the beginning of chapter 12. It was 6 days before the Passover. And then verse 12, it's the next day. Now, we don't know the difference between that next day and when Jesus is here in verse 20, but it's somewhere within 5 days of Jesus' upcoming death. And Jesus says, the time has come. For what? For the Son of Man, that's Jesus speaking about himself, to be glorified. How will Jesus be glorified? Surprisingly, through death. Look at verse 24. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. See, at first glance, it seems like Jesus is talking about an agricultural image that the people would have understood. They understood what a seed looked like. They understood that if you just left the seed on a shelf or in your hand or wherever you decide to keep seeds, I don't know where you keep seeds, but if you keep them there without planting them in the ground, it just stays as a single seed. But if you plant the seed in the ground and it dies, it produces a crop. More seeds, many seeds. Literally, the word is much fruit. But remember, Jesus is saying this in light of what he said earlier, verse 23, the hour has come for him to be glorified. He's not talking about wheat dying and bearing much fruit. He's talking about himself dying. And through this one death, many will have life. That's what Jesus is saying. That's how he'll be glorified, through his death. And yet as he comes closer and closer to this point of death, which is at least, well, minimum 5 days away, it could be closer. Jesus is not going to this process unemotional. He's not a robot. He's one of us. He feels things, and we see this in verse 27. Have a look with me, verse 27. Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. It is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. See, in verse 27, we see Jesus' heart, his soul, his feelings, his emotions. He's troubled. That word can also be translated as inner turmoil, despair. Now, it's not despair in light of his upcoming death. He's just said earlier, verse 24, he knows he's going to die. Death is not what is despairing his heart. Death is not what's troubling his soul. It's what's going to happen at that moment of death on that cross. Because at that moment when he dies, he will experience the wrath of God, the judgment of God. The judgment that he doesn't deserve, that we, humanity, deserve, comes upon Jesus. All of humanity's judgment upon Jesus. The one who has been in perfect, harmonious, loving relationship with the Father for all of eternity. At the moment of the cross, he'll experience something for the very first time. The wrath of God. The anger of God, the judgment of God. That's what's despairing his heart. That's what's troubling his heart. But it's all part of God's plan. That's why we see in verse 27, he doesn't need to ask God to save him from that hour. That's why he's come to die. To die so that, verse 28, he can glorify the Father's name. See, Jesus' death that's about to happen will both glorify him and glorify his Father. This was part of God's plan. And so Jesus unpacks this further for them as we get to verse 31. Look with me at verse 31. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Jesus is saying his death will bring about the judgment of the world. Now, up to this moment in John's gospel, we have seen multiple people make judgments on Jesus. And it will climax very soon when the Jewish religious leaders on that Passover festival day will crucify the innocent Jesus. They will make judgments on him. The world will make a judgment and say, this Jesus has been cursed by God. And yet, what does Jesus say? In fact, his death will bring judgment on the world. They have crucified the one and only Son of God. They've rejected the one whom God has sent. That will bring judgment on the whole world. But it's not just the world. It's also a spiritual reality that is happening at the moment. At that moment, verse 31, we're also told now the prince of this world, that is Satan, will be driven out. He'll be defeated. Jesus' death is not just a physical reality, it's a spiritual reality when the spiritual battle is won by the Lord Jesus. The devil is defeated. Satan is defeated. Death is defeated. Sin is defeated. And so that's why Jesus says in verse 32, when he is lifted up, imagery of him being lifted up on the cross. But also that word lifted up can also be translated as exalted. So it's also talking not just about Jesus' death, but also on the third day when he is exalted up, raised to life again, to be with the Father. He's talking about his death and resurrection. At that moment, verse 32, he will draw all people to himself. Now, when he says all people, he's not talking about every single individual person in all of humanity. He's talking about all people, in other words, not just the Jews, but also the non-Jews, the Gentiles, you and me. Remember verse 20? The Gentiles came to him. That's what started this. The hour has come. And Jesus is saying when he dies, then Jew and Gentile can come to him, can be saved. So a response is necessary for those who say they believe and follow him. And so Jesus goes on to explain this in verse 35. Then Jesus told them, you are going to have the light a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. If you were with us when we got to chapter 8, which was a few weeks ago, John chapter 8, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And now 4 chapters later, he starts to unpack that a bit more. He says you need to walk in the light. Because, verse 35, he's only going to be with them a little bit longer. Soon, Jesus knows he's going to die. Soon, Jesus knows he's going to be resurrected. And so he's saying to the people, there is an urgency. I'm not going to be with you for much longer. Start following me now. Walk in the light, so that you don't need to be in the darkness, the spiritual darkness, receiving the judgment of God. But instead, verse 36, believe in the light. Believe in Jesus, because, verse 36 goes on, you can become a child of light. Jesus says, I don't want you to be in darkness anymore. You can be a child of God. So believe in me, the light of the world. But what does it look like to walk as a child of light? Well, Jesus tells us very strikingly in verse 25. Come back with me to verse 25. Anyone who loves their life will lose it. And whoever hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. It's shocking, isn't it? It's quite surreal, quite shocking to us to hear that Jesus says you need to hate, not love, that spiritual dark world that you live in. You can't love it because if you do, Jesus says, you'll lose your life. You'll remain in darkness. You'll receive the judgment of God. Instead, he's saying you need to hate that dark life. That life where we say to God, I want to do things my way, God. I'm number one. I'm going to serve me, not you. And yet Jesus says, if you hate that attitude to life, hate going, I want to live for me, but instead live for God, then you will keep it for eternal life. You'll keep following Jesus, which, as verse 26 goes on, means serving him. And people who serve and follow Jesus, look at the end of verse 26, my Father will honor the one who serves me. Serving Jesus leads to God the Father honoring you. I was looking up what's the highest honor you can get in Australia. Apparently, it's the Medal of Order of Australia. This is what it looks like. In the UK, which I think is cooler, you can be damed or knighted with the Grand Cross, which I just think is cool because there's a sword involved. And then from the world's perspective, maybe the greatest honor is to win a Nobel Prize. And yet God says, all those things, even being knighted, which I think is going to be cool, but even that pales in comparison to the honor and praise of God, the creator of the universe. Jesus is saying, you can have the greatest honor and praise, and it comes from God. So follow him. Serve him. So how do his listeners respond to this amazing honor and praise that is available? Well, we see that Jesus says to them, a saving belief is never alone. See, as we continue on in verse 37, John helps us see what actually is happening in people's hearts. Look at verse 37. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, that is the Jewish presence, so many people had seen what Jesus had done, the miracles he had done. Look at the end of verse 37. They still would not believe in him. Was this a surprise or a shock to Jesus? No. In fact, John writes that the prophet Isaiah 700 years earlier spoke about this, that people would see and hear and not believe. In fact, their hearts would be hardened, and that this was both God doing it and them being held responsible for their actions. Both are at work. They choose to harden their hearts and go, I don't want to put Jesus first. I want to keep living my self-fulfilling life. The signs by themselves don't save. I don't know about you, but when you talk to people about Jesus, have you ever come across when someone says to you, and this is what I've heard many times before, John, if Jesus were to just appear to me right now, I'd believe. Or if he just was to do just one of those miracles, I'd believe him right now. Have you heard that? There were hundreds, if not thousands of people 2,000 years ago who saw Jesus, saw what he did, including, like we saw a couple of weeks ago, the raising of a dead man 4 days later. And yet, verse 37, they would not believe. Miraculous signs do not bring about a saving faith. But there were some who did believe. Some Jews did believe. We see this in verse 42. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. You're like, wow, that's great. Even the Jewish religious leaders, some of those guys are believing in Jesus. But their belief is shallow. Look at verse 42 as it continues on. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith, for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved human praise more than the praise from God. They hid their belief in Jesus. Why? 2 reasons. They're kind of linked to each other. The first one is because of fear. Fear of being kicked out of the Jewish synagogues. That is, the place where the Jews would worship and meet God. And they're fearful of being kicked out of church and not being able to meet with all the influential religious people, and so they keep quiet. But in fact, John shows us, God's word shows us what's actually happening in their hearts. It's not just fear of man. In fact, verse 43 says it's because they actually loved the praise. That word praise can also be translated glory that come from people, rather than the praise that comes from God. Remember verse 26? You can look forward to the praise, the honor from God, and yet what did they want? They wanted the praise of man, the glory from man, of people. Verse 25 is what they're doing. They're loving life now, in the darkness. See, a shallow belief doesn't save. Their hearts actually haven't been transformed, realigned, put their perspective on Jesus. Instead, they keep looking at the things around them in the world, including the praise and glory from people, instead of from the Creator. So what then does a saving belief look like? Well, Jesus goes on to tell us in verse 44. See, in verse 44, Jesus says, you not only need to believe in him, but the one who sent him. Why does that matter? Because verse 35, the one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. I find that very comforting. Jesus says, when you look at me, you see God the Father. God didn't remain invisible. He made himself visible by becoming one of us, dwelling amongst us. We saw this way back last year when we looked at the beginning of John. John chapter 1, verse 1, the Word was with God in the beginning, and then verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus shows us what God looks like, what his character is. And he does this to save us. Look at verse 46. I've come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Jesus has come to reveal who God is, to rescue us out of the spiritual darkness that we are all stuck in by our own efforts. We continue by our own efforts to reject God again and again and again, and we can't get out except when you follow the light. Jesus has come so that we don't have to stay in darkness. But this saving belief is never alone. So you not only need to believe that he is the light, but you need to follow him. In verse 47, Jesus says, you don't just hear my words, you need to also keep them, to obey him. Because at the end of verse 47 says, that's what it means to become saved. You can believe in the light, but you also need to follow and obey the light. Otherwise, you're stuck in darkness. And I'll try this illustration, though I don't think it's going to work because it's so bright. But if we turn off all the lights, and there's just one light, now you can believe that the light exists. I'm going to put an image up on the screen as well. You can believe the light exists. You can say that light will guide me. But if the light, and I can't make this light move, but if the light on the screen starts to move, if you stay still, you end up in the dark. You can keep believing that the light exists. You can keep believing that the light will save you. But if you don't stay in the light, you end up in the dark. We can turn the lights back on. Jesus' point is there's no such thing as just believing in him. You need to follow him. Otherwise, you're stuck in spiritual darkness. He doesn't want to do that. He wants us to follow him. He wants us to not be in the darkness. He wants to save us. Because the flip side is verse 48. We reject him. We reject his words. And he says at the end of verse 48, when we breathe our last breath, or Jesus returns and we stand before God, end of verse 48, we will be condemned. We will be stuck in the darkness and receiving the judgment of God that we deserve. And yet Jesus has come as the light of the world, not only to show us how to be saved, but then to guide us so that we continue to be saved in him. See, a saving belief is never alone. It's always accompanied by following Jesus. That your life is transformed as you continue to walk in the light through the darkness of the world. So we see that his word is good, that his word is amazing to love and follow, and that his word leads us to life, eternal life. So coming back to that question, I asked it at the beginning, whose praise do you live for? Do you live for the praise of the people of this world, or for the praise of the one who created the world? God's word encourages us today to be people who live having Jesus' perspective. And so I want to finish with two reflections of what does that look like to live having Jesus' perspective. The first one is this: following him who died for you and me. You see, Jesus didn't need to die. He could have happily stayed as that seed, but he chose to go and give up his life so that many would have life. And he did it for two reasons. One, it's for his glory and for ultimately the Father's glory, that we would see how amazing and loving our God is. That we are stuck in darkness and yet Jesus has come to rescue us, and God has done that for us so that we might see how majestic he is. But secondly, that through his death, many will live. Because it's at the cross that we see Jesus and God's glory fully displayed. Jesus dies for our judgment. The judgment of us being stuck in that darkness that we can't get ourselves out of. And yet Jesus comes to rescue us, to save us, to transform us. As the light of the world who we are called to follow him. And so we need to keep asking our great God to keep changing our hearts to hate the life of this world. The life that is stuck in spiritual darkness. And as he continues to shape our hearts, we put him first. Above all the good things that are in our lives, he's number one. He's the one we prioritize. Because he's trustworthy. He's faithful. He's worthy of following because he's come to save us. And if you're still working out who Jesus is, it's great that you're here, and we want to encourage you, keep coming back. I'd encourage you, read John's gospel for yourself. I was talking to one of the guys up at the shops who works in the shops, and I was chatting about inviting him to Easter, and he was saying, "Oh, John, I haven't been to church since I was a kid." And I said, "So you haven't really thought about Jesus as an adult?" He's like, "No." I encourage him, come along to church, but read Jesus for yourself as an adult. Because eternity is at stake. And I also want to say, perhaps for you or perhaps for a friend or a neighbor, coming along to Christianity Explored, our next one that's happening after Easter is another way to keep investigating. It's awesome. At the moment, about 8 to 10 people are investigating Jesus at the moment in our Christianity Explored course. There are others that you could invite, or you could come along yourself and be part of the new group. Because following Jesus is worth it on so many levels. It's worth it on the level of being taken out of that darkness. It's worth on the level of having the judgment of God dealt with for us once for all. But it's also what we see uniquely in this passage today. Verse 26, that the Father will honor the one who serves him. Serving Jesus means following him. The one who died for us. And we can look forward to the day when the creator of the whole universe praises you, praises me. And it's not that we deserved it. You and I both know we very often fail to honor God. So how is it that Jesus can say, "My Father will honor the one who serves me"? It's not because of us, but it's because of Jesus. We get Jesus' honor and praise because he's the one who lived the perfect life. And then he dies the death we deserve, and then he gives us his glory and honor. Isn't that amazing? We get to share in the praise of Jesus. That when we stand before God, he will praise you because of Jesus' perfect life. That's better than being knighted, getting the Australian Medal of Honor, or even a Nobel Prize. To get praise from the Creator, our God, because of Jesus. Let's pray. Father God, we do thank you that your Son willingly came into the world for the very purpose of dying for us, so that through his one death, he would provide life for many. Father, help us to not have a shallow belief. Father, help us have a belief that follows your Son, the light of the world. Help us not just in concept or in our mind believe that Jesus is the one who saves, but he is also the one in whom we follow, and empower us to do so. Father, we pray that you would help our hearts be captivated more and more by Jesus. That you would transform our hearts to hate this life because we long for the eternal life to come. And on that day, we will receive your praise and honor, not because of what we've done, but because we follow the one who's done everything for us. And it's in Jesus' name we pray these things. Amen.